It was one of those crisp November mornings where the air carried a hint of frost, and the sky stretched wide and clear like a freshly washed canvas. Jack Miller stood inside his small garage, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better days. His overalls were smeared with grease and there was a smudge of oil across his cheek, but he didn't mind. This was his world. The hum of engines, the scent of motor oil, and the satisfaction of fixing something broken. Jack's garage wasn't fancy. It sat on the edge of town, tucked between a hardware store and an empty field dotted with dry grass. The building itself was weathered, its paint peeling in places, but it had charm. A faded sign above the door read, "Miller's Auto Repair," in bold letters, though some of the paint had chipped away over the years. Inside, shelves lined the walls stacked high with tools, spare parts, and containers of oil. An old radio perched precariously on a workbench played soft country music, filling the silence as Jack worked. Today, however, Jack wasn't focused on any particular job. He'd already finished up with the last customer, a woman whose sedan had been making strange noises, and now he was tidying up, getting ready to close early for Thanksgiving. For once, things were slow, and he couldn't have been happier about it. He hadn't taken a full day off in weeks, and the thought of spending tomorrow with his wife, Lisa, and their 2 kids filled him with warmth. Lisa would probably spend the afternoon cooking her famous turkey, stuffing, and cranberry sauce while the kids ran around the house laughing. They'd watch football on TV, argue good-naturedly about dessert choices, and maybe even take a walk after dinner to burn off all the food. It sounded perfect, simple, just what he needed after months of long hours and hard work. But as Jack leaned against the workbench, sipping from a mug of lukewarm coffee, he heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside. Sighing, he glanced toward the open garage door. Sure enough, an old pickup truck rattled into view, coughing smoke from its exhaust pipe. Jack set down his mug and straightened up, squinting at the driver who climbed out. The man looked tired, his face pale and drawn. His jacket was worn thin, and his boots were caked with mud. He approached cautiously, removing his cap and twisting it nervously in his hands. "Excuse me," he said, his voice hoarse but polite. "I'm sorry to bother you, especially today of all days, but my truck just gave out. I don't know much about cars, and I need to get somewhere important." Jack frowned, glancing at the clock on the wall. It was nearly noon, which meant he still had plenty of time to fix whatever was wrong if it wasn't too complicated. Still, he hesitated. Something about the stranger made him uneasy, not because the man seemed dangerous, but because he radiated desperation. There was a weight in his eyes, like he carried more than just a broken-down truck. "What's the problem?" Jack asked, stepping closer to inspect the vehicle. It started making this awful grinding noise a few miles back. The man explained, gesturing vaguely toward the engine. "Then it just died. I pulled over here because your place was the closest thing I could find. Please, if you can help me, I'll do anything. My family, they're waiting for me." "Family?" Jack echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Yes." The man nodded quickly. "My wife and daughter. We were supposed to meet them for Thanksgiving, but our car broke down along the way. Now they're stuck out there, miles from here, with no way to get home. I promised I'd come back for them." Jack studied the man for a moment longer, trying to decide what to do. He wanted to go home, to start his own holiday early. But the look in the stranger's eyes tugged at him. Finally, he sighed and grabbed his toolbox. "All right," he said gruffly. "Let me take a look." As Jack popped the hood and began examining the engine, the man introduced himself as Daniel Carter. He hovered nearby, watching anxiously as Jack poked and prodded at various parts. Occasionally, Daniel tried to make conversation, thanking Jack repeatedly and mentioning how relieved he was to have found someone willing to help. But Jack stayed focused, tuning out the chatter as he diagnosed the issue. It turned out to be a relatively simple fix, a busted fuel pump, but it would take some time to replace. Jack worked methodically, his hands moving with practiced ease. As he did, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about Daniel wasn't quite right. The man's story checked out, sure, but there was an oddness to him, a vagueness in the way he spoke. Every time Jack asked a question, where exactly were his family? How far away were they? Daniel's answers were evasive, almost rehearsed. Still, Jack pushed the thoughts aside. Maybe the guy was just stressed, or maybe he was hiding something embarrassing, like not having enough money to pay. Either way, it wasn't Jack's business. All that mattered was getting the truck running again so Daniel could reunite with his family. By the time Jack tightened the final bolt, the sun had dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the garage floor. Wiping his hands clean, he motioned for Daniel to start the engine. The truck roared to life, smooth and steady, and Daniel let out a breath of relief. "You saved me," he said earnestly, pulling out his wallet. "How much do I owe you?" Jack waved him off. "Don't worry about it. Just glad I could help." But Daniel wouldn't hear of it. He insisted on repaying Jack somehow, pressing until Jack finally relented. Little did Jack know, accepting that offer would lead him down a path far stranger than he could ever imagine. Jack wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving another streak of grease across his skin. The repair was almost done, but it had taken longer than he'd expected. Fixing a busted fuel pump wasn't rocket science, but this old truck had clearly been neglected for years. Rust caked the bolts, and several wires were frayed, forcing Jack to improvise solutions. Still, he worked steadily, his movements efficient and precise. He didn't like leaving things half-finished, even when the job wasn't exactly what he'd planned for Thanksgiving Eve. Daniel hovered nearby, pacing nervously or leaning against the truck's fender. Every so often, he checked his watch or glanced toward the road as if expecting someone or something to appear. His unease was palpable, though he tried to mask it by making small talk. "You're really good at this," he said at one point, his voice tinged with admiration. "I don't know much about cars, but I can tell you've got a gift." Jack grunted in response, not looking up from the engine. Compliments didn't mean much to him. He just wanted to finish the job and get home. But Daniel kept talking, filling the silence with fragments of his story. He mentioned his wife, Rachel, and how she always worried when he traveled alone. He talked about his daughter, Emily, a bright teenager who loved photography and dreamed of becoming an artist. He described their life together, simple, happy, and full of love. At first, Jack tuned most of it out, focusing instead on tightening bolts and adjusting parts. But as the minutes ticked by, some of Daniel's words began to stick. There was a sadness in his tone, a longing that went beyond mere concern for his stranded family. It made Jack curious, though he wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the way Daniel spoke in vague terms, never quite answering questions directly. Or maybe it was the flicker of hesitation in his eyes whenever Jack asked where they lived or how far away they were. Finally, after what felt like hours, Jack stepped back and gave the engine a satisfied nod. "That should do it," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Try starting it up." Daniel practically leapt into the driver's seat, turning the key with trembling fingers. The truck sputtered once, then roared to life, its engine purring smoothly. Relief washed over Daniel's face and he let out a shaky laugh. "You're amazing," he said, climbing out of the cab. "I can't thank you enough." Jack shrugged, brushing off the praise. "Just part of the job," he muttered. "Glad I could help." But Daniel wasn't done. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, flipping it open to reveal a wad of crumpled bills. "Here," he said, holding them out. "Take it, you deserve every penny." "I told you, don't worry about it," Jack replied firmly, crossing his arms. He didn't need payment, not for something as simple as a fuel pump. Besides, he'd already accepted too many delays to his holiday plans. All he wanted now was to go home. Daniel hesitated, lowering his hand but not putting the money away. "Then let me repay you another way," he insisted. "At least let me buy you dinner. My family, they're staying at a cabin not far from here. We'd be honored to have you join us for Thanksgiving." Jack raised an eyebrow, surprised by the offer. Dinner with strangers wasn't exactly his idea of a relaxing evening, but there was something genuine in Daniel's expression, a mix of gratitude and desperation that made it hard to refuse. Plus, he couldn't deny the pang of guilt he felt at the thought of turning down such heartfelt hospitality. "Look," Daniel added quickly, sensing Jack's hesitation. "We understand if you'd rather spend the holiday with your own family, but we'd feel terrible knowing we didn't even try to thank you properly. Please, it's the least we can do." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 5 o'clock, which meant Lisa would already be wondering where he was. Still, she'd understand. She always did. And honestly, he was curious about Daniel's family. What kind of people inspired such loyalty and devotion? "All right," he said, finally nodding. "But only for a little while. I've got my own family waiting for me." Daniel's face lit up with. The gravel path leading to the cabin wound through dense woods, the truck's headlights cutting through the growing darkness. Jack sat silently in the passenger seat, his gaze fixed on the narrow road ahead. The deeper they drove into the forest, the quieter everything became. The hum of the engine seemed louder than usual, almost intrusive against the stillness of the trees. He glanced at Daniel occasionally, who was focused on steering, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. The man hadn't said much since they left the garage, and though Jack tried to convince himself it was just exhaustion, something about the silence felt heavy. Finally, after what felt like miles, the cabin came into view. It wasn't fancy, just a modest wooden structure with a sloped roof and a stone chimney puffing out wisps of smoke, but it had a charm to it. Warm light spilled from the windows, casting golden squares onto the porch. As they approached, two figures stepped outside, a woman and a teenage girl. The woman looked to be in her mid-30s with dark hair tied back loosely and a kind smile that softened her sharp features. The girl stood slightly behind her, clutching a camera in one hand, her eyes wide with curiosity. Daniel parked the truck and climbed out quickly, rushing over to embrace the woman. "Rachel," he said, his voice thick with relief. "I made it." She hugged him tightly before pulling back to study him. "You look terrible," she teased gently, brushing dirt off his jacket. Then her gaze shifted to Jack, who was climbing out of the truck more slowly. Her expression softened further, and she extended a hand. "You must be the mechanic Daniel told us about. I can't thank you enough for helping him." Jack shook her hand, feeling a bit awkward. "Just doing my job," he replied, shrugging. "Glad I could help." "I'm Emily," the girl piped up, stepping forward shyly. She held up her camera. "Do you mind if I take your picture? You saved our Thanksgiving." Jack blinked, caught off guard by the request. Sure, I guess," he said, managing a small smile. Emily snapped a quick photo before lowering the camera, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Well, come inside," Rachel urged, gesturing toward the cabin. "It's freezing out here, and we've got plenty of food. Dinner won't wait forever." As they entered the cabin, Jack took in his surroundings. The interior was cozy, with wooden beams lining the ceiling and a crackling fire warming the room. A long table dominated the space, set with mismatched plates and silverware. The smell of roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, and freshly baked bread filled the air, making Jack's stomach rumble despite himself. Lisa's cooking was always great, but this smelled incredible. "Please sit anywhere," Rachel said, motioning toward the table. She disappeared into the kitchen momentarily, returning with a steaming dish of green beans. Emily followed close behind, carrying a bowl of cranberry sauce. Daniel busied himself pouring glasses of water, his earlier nervous energy replaced by a quiet determination to make Jack feel welcome. Dinner started simply enough. Rachel asked Jack questions about his work, genuinely interested in how he'd become a mechanic. Emily chimed in occasionally, sharing stories about school and her photography projects. Jack found himself relaxing, enjoying the easy flow of conversation. For a moment it felt like any other family dinner, warm, comforting, and full of laughter. But then subtle things began to stand out. Rachel spoke fondly of their life together, yet avoided specifics about where they lived or what Daniel did for work. Emily mentioned taking pictures of places most people don't see, though she didn't elaborate, and every so often Daniel would shoot them both a warning glance as if reminding them to stay vague. Jack noticed these oddities but chose not to comment. Instead, he focused on the food, which was delicious, and the company, which was surprisingly pleasant. Still, The nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right lingered in the back of his mind. After dessert, a rich apple pie served warm with dollops of whipped cream, Rachel excused herself and returned with an old photo album. She placed it on the table and opened it carefully, revealing faded snapshots of smiling faces. "These are from when Emily was little," she explained, flipping through the pages. "We used to travel a lot before settling down." Jack leaned closer, studying the images. At first glance, they looked ordinary: family vacations, birthday, parties, lazy afternoons in the park. But as he examined the faces, something struck him as strange. None of the photos included Daniel or Emily. Instead, the people in the pictures bore an uncanny resemblance to Jack and his own family. The similarities were eerie, down to the way the man in one photo tilted his head or the way the child grinned mischievously. He frowned, looking up at Rachel. "Who are these people?" he asked, his voice cautious. Rachel hesitated, exchanging a glance with Daniel. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Daniel cleared his throat. "That's part of why we wanted to invite you here tonight," he admitted. "There's something we need to tell you." Jack's heart skipped a beat. Whatever this was, he realized it wasn't going to be simple. Jack leaned back in his chair, staring at the photo album on the table. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing, or rather, what he wasn't seeing. The people in the photos looked so familiar, like echoes of his own family. But they weren't Daniel, Rachel, or Emily. Not even close. Rachel closed the album gently, her hands trembling just slightly. "We owe you an explanation," she said quietly, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "You've been nothing but kind to us, and we can't repay that kindness with lies." Jack frowned, his curiosity outweighing his unease. For now. "What's going on?" he asked, glancing between them. "Who are those people?" Daniel sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. He exchanged another glance with Rachel before speaking. "They're not exactly people," he began, hesitantly. "At least, not anymore. They were once, a long time ago. But now, well, let's just say they're memories. Fragments of lives we left behind." Jack blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Memories? What does that mean?" "It means," Rachel interjected softly, "that we aren't who you think we are. We're not human, not in the way you understand it." The words hung in the air, heavy and surreal. Jack stared at them, searching their faces for any sign of a joke or misunderstanding. But there was none. They looked serious, almost solemn. Emily spoke up then, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're travelers," she said, clutching the edge of the photo album. "From somewhere else. Another place. Another time. We came here because our world, it was destroyed. There was nothing left for us." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. This had to be some kind of trick, right? A story spun to entertain, or maybe unsettle, a stranger. But the sincerity in their voices made it hard to dismiss. "You're saying," he started, struggling to find the right words. "You're aliens or ghosts, something like that?" Daniel shook his head. "Not exactly. Think of us as visitors, observers. We came here hoping to learn to survive. And over time, we grew attached to this world, to your people, to families like yours." Jack's brow furrowed. "Families like mine?" "Yes," Rachel said, nodding. "People who care for each other, who work hard, sacrifice, and keep going even when life gets tough. People like you, Jack. That's why we wanted to meet you tonight, to thank you, not just for fixing the truck, but for reminding us why we chose this world as our refuge." Jack sat silently, trying to process everything they were telling him. It sounded impossible, insane even. Yet deep down, part of him believed them. Maybe it was the calmness in their voices, the honesty in their eyes. Or maybe it was the way the pieces seemed to fit together. Their vague answers earlier, the strange familiarity of the photos. Whatever it was, he couldn't ignore it. "So," he said slowly, breaking the silence, "what happens now? Are you leaving?" Staying? What do you want from me? Rachel smiled faintly, though there was sadness behind it. Nothing more than what you've already given us, a reminder of what truly matters. As for us, we don't know yet. Our time here has been uncertain, fleeting, but we'll have to make a choice soon. What kind of choice? Jack pressed. Daniel hesitated, before answering. There's a chance for us to go back, to return to where we came from. A doorway, you could call it. It's opening soon, and if we take it, we might never come back. But staying here means giving up that chance forever. Jack rubbed his temples, feeling overwhelmed. This was too much to take in, all of it. Aliens, portals, choices about worlds he didn't belong to. None of it made sense, and yet it did. In a weird, twisted way, it felt real. Why tell me all this? He asked finally. Why bring me here? Because you helped us, Emily said simply. Her voice was soft but firm. You didn't have to fix Dad's truck. You didn't have to come here tonight. But you did. Because that's who you are. And that's worth more than you realize. Jack looked around the table, at Rachel's gentle smile, Daniel's weary determination, and Emily's hopeful gaze. For all their strangeness, they felt human, real, like a family, just like his own. I don't know what to say, he admitted, shaking his head. This is a lot. You don't have to decide anything, Rachel assured him. All we ask is that you listen, and maybe when the time comes, help us figure out what's best. Jack nodded slowly, still processing everything. He didn't fully understand who or what they were, but one thing was clear. This night had changed him in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, its warmth barely touching the chill that had settled over the room. Jack sat stiffly on the couch, his mind racing as he tried to process everything Daniel's family had told him. It was too much. Aliens, other worlds, choices about leaving or staying. None of it felt real, and yet, sitting there in the cozy cabin surrounded by these strangers, it somehow did. Rachel leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but firm. Jack, she said, we know this is hard to believe, but we wouldn't have brought you here if we didn't trust you. Trust me? Jack echoed, raising an eyebrow. You just told me you're not even from this world. How am I supposed to react to that? Emily looked up from the photo album, her fingers tracing the edge of one faded picture. We're still the same people you met today, she said quietly. Just different, does that make sense? Jack shook his head. Not really, no offense, but none of this makes sense. Daniel sighed and moved closer, crouching down so he was at eye level with Jack. Let us explain more, he said. Maybe it'll help. For the next hour, they spoke in turns, sharing fragments of their story. They described their original world, a place vastly different from Earth, filled with beauty and wonder but also destruction. Wars, environmental collapse, and endless conflict had torn it apart until nothing remained. Desperate to survive, they fled, traveling across dimensions until they found Earth. It wasn't random, Rachel added. We chose this planet because of its people. Humans are resilient, imperfect, yes, but capable of incredible things. Love, kindness, sacrifice. It's what drew us here. And what kept us here, Emily chimed in, holding up the photo album. These pictures. They're memories of families like yours. People who reminded us of home even though we didn't belong. Jack frowned, glancing at the photos again. He still couldn't shake the eerie resemblance to his own wife and kids. Why do they look so much like my family? He asked. Rachel hesitated before answering. Because when we arrived, we needed to blend in. We took forms inspired by the humans we admired most. Your family. You embody qualities we value. Strength, loyalty, compassion. That's why we chose your likeness. Jack swallowed hard, feeling a mix of pride and discomfort. He wasn't sure how to respond to that. Instead, he focused on the bigger question gnawing at him. What happens now? If this portal opens, are you going back? Daniel nodded slowly. That's the choice we have to make. Go back and try to rebuild our old world, or stay here and keep learning from yours. Either way, it's permanent. You'd leave behind everything you've built here? Jack asked. Yes, Rachel replied without hesitation. But it's not easy. This world has become our home too. Staying means giving up the chance to return to where we came from. Leaving means saying goodbye to all of this. The weight of their dilemma hung heavy in the air. Jack could see the strain on their faces, the conflict between duty and desire, between past and present. He realized then that they weren't just asking for advice, they were seeking understanding. Connection. What do you want me to do? Jack asked finally. I'm just a mechanic. I don't know anything about portals or other worlds. You already did it, Emily said softly. You helped us remember what's important. You reminded us that home isn't just a place, it's the people you love. Jack stared at her, struck by the simplicity of her words. She was right in a way. Home wasn't about coordinates or dimensions. It was about belonging. About finding a place where you felt safe, valued, and loved. Rachel reached out and placed a hand on his arm. Whatever we decide, we'll always be grateful to you, Jack. For tonight, for listening, for being exactly who you are. He nodded, unsure of what else to say. The conversation shifted after that, growing lighter as they talked about smaller things, their favorite foods, hobbies, dreams for the future. Slowly, the tension eased, replaced by a shared sense of camaraderie. Despite everything, Jack found himself enjoying their company. They might not be human, but they felt real, genuine. As the fire burned lower and the clock ticked past midnight, Jack knew it was time to go. He stood stretching his legs and thanked them for dinner and the stories. I don't know what I believe, he admitted with a small smile, but I'm glad I came. So are we, Daniel said, walking him to the door. And no matter what happens, remember, you gave us something priceless tonight, perspective. Outside, the cold night air hit Jack like a shock. The stars shone brightly above, countless pinpricks of light scattered across the vast sky. As he climbed into his truck and started the engine, he glanced back at the cabin one last time. Its windows glowed warmly, a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. Driving away, Jack couldn't stop thinking about what they'd said, about choices, connections, and the meaning of home. He didn't have all the answers, but maybe he didn't need them. Sometimes life was about trusting the journey, even when the road ahead was uncertain. The drive back home was quiet, the hum of the truck's engine blending with the soft crunch of gravel beneath its tires. Jack stared ahead at the dark road, his mind replaying everything that had happened at the cabin. He couldn't stop thinking about Daniel, Rachel, and Emily, their stories, their struggles, and the impossible choice they faced. It all felt surreal, like something out of a movie or a dream. Yet deep down he knew it was real. Their emotions had been too raw, too honest to dismiss. When he finally pulled into his driveway, the house was dark except for a single light, glowing in the living room window. Lisa must have waited up for him. Guilt tugged at him as he climbed out of the truck and walked inside. She was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her book resting on her lap. When she saw him, she smiled tiredly. You're late, she teased gently. Everything okay? Jack hesitated, unsure how to explain where he'd been or what he'd experienced. How could he tell her about a family who weren't human but felt more real than some people he'd known his whole life? Instead, he just nodded. Yeah, everything's fine, just got caught up helping someone. Lisa studied him for a moment, her brow furrowing slightly. You look like you've got a lot on your mind. I do, Jack admitted, sinking onto the couch beside her. But I'll tell you about it later. Right now, I just want to sit here with you. She didn't press him further, and for that, he was grateful. They sat together in silence, the warmth of the house wrapping around him like a comforting hug. As much as he cared about Daniel's family, being home reminded him of what truly mattered, his own family. The next morning, Jack woke early, unable to shake the feeling that he needed to check on them. Something told him the decision about the portal wouldn't wait much longer. After a quick breakfast, he drove back to the cabin, hoping they were still there. When he arrived, the place looked exactly as it had the night before. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the air carried the faint scent of pine. But as he approached, he noticed something strange, a faint glow emanating from behind the trees. Curious, he followed the path leading into the woods until he reached a small clearing. There, standing near the edge of the trees, were Daniel, Rachel, and Emily. Between them hovered a shimmering portal, its surface alive with swirling colors that seemed to pulse with energy. It was breathtaking and unsettling all at once. "Jack," Daniel said, spotting him first. "We didn't expect you to come back." "I wasn't sure if I should," Jack replied honestly. "But I figured you might need, I don't know, support or advice." Rachel smiled sadly. "You've already given us both," she said. "But thank you for coming." Emily stepped forward, her camera dangling from her neck. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" she asked quietly. "Leaving, I mean." Jack hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I can't answer that for you. Only you know what feels right. But I will say this. Wherever you go, don't forget why you stayed here in the first place. Don't forget the lessons you learned or the people who inspired you." Daniel nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the portal. "It's tempting," he admitted. "Going back, starting over, but staying here means holding on to hope. For this world, for humanity, for families like yours. And maybe that's worth fighting for," Jack added softly. For a long moment, no one spoke. The forest was silent except for the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Finally, Rachel took a deep breath and turned to her husband and daughter. "Are we ready?" she asked. They exchanged glances, then nodded. Together they stepped closer to the portal, their hands linked tightly. Before crossing, Daniel turned back to Jack. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything." Jack nodded, unable to find the words. He watched as they stepped through the shimmering gateway, their forms dissolving into light. Within seconds, the portal closed, leaving nothing behind but the cool night air and the faint echo of their presence. Standing alone in the clearing, Jack felt a mix of sadness and relief. He knew he'd never see them again, but he also knew they'd made the right choice, for themselves and perhaps for the world they left behind. As he walked back to his truck, the weight of the night lifted slightly. Life was full of mysteries, choices and moments that defied explanation. All he could do was trust that every encounter, no matter how strange, held meaning, and that sometimes, even the smallest acts of kindness could change lives forever. Jack stood in the clearing for a long time after the portal disappeared, staring at the spot where Daniel, Rachel, and Emily had vanished. The night was eerily quiet now, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes you hyper-aware of every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the steady rhythm of your own breathing. It felt surreal, like waking up from a dream but still carrying its weight with you. He didn't know how long he stayed there, lost in thought, before he finally turned and walked back toward the cabin. His boots crunched softly on the gravel path, the noise grounding him in the present moment. When he reached the cabin, he glanced inside one last time, half expecting to see some trace of the family who had occupied it so briefly. But the place was empty, save for the faint scent of wood smoke and the remnants of their Thanksgiving dinner scattered across the table. It struck him then how fleeting their encounter had been. They'd only known each other for less than a day, yet Jack felt as though they'd shared something profound, something that transcended the boundaries of time, space, and even species. He couldn't explain it, not fully, but he knew he wouldn't forget them anytime soon. On the drive home, Jack replayed their final moments in his mind. The way Rachel had smiled at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. The way Daniel had clasped his hand tightly, as if trying to convey everything he couldn't put into words. And Emily, sweet, curious Emily, had handed him something just before stepping through the portal. A small silver pendant engraved with intricate symbols that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Jack pulled the pendant from his pocket now, holding it up to examine it more closely. The symbols were unfamiliar, almost alien, but they seemed to pulse faintly with warmth when he touched them. He didn't understand what they meant, but he could feel their significance. This wasn't just a trinket. It was a reminder, a token of connection between two worlds. When he got home, Lisa was already asleep, curled up on the couch with a blanket draped over her. Jack smiled softly at the sight, feeling a surge of love and appreciation for his wife. Quietly, he slipped the pendant into his toolbox, deciding to keep it safe until he figured out what to do with it. For now, it would remain a secret, something only he understood. The next morning, life returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such an extraordinary experience. Jack went about his routine, fixing cars, chatting with customers, and spending time with his family. But every now and then, he'd catch himself thinking about Daniel, Rachel, and Emily, wondering where they were now, whether they'd found peace in their decision to leave or return. One evening, as he sat by the fire with Lisa and the kids, Jack realized something important. The encounter had changed him, not in a dramatic, obvious way, but subtly. It had reminded him of the value of kindness, of taking risks to help others, and of cherishing the people you love while you still have them. Those lessons weren't just for aliens or travelers. They were for everyone. "Dad," his youngest child asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. "Why are you smiling?" Jack blinked, surprised to find that he was smiling. "No reason," he said, ruffling the boy's hair. "Just thinking about how lucky we are." Lisa raised an eyebrow but didn't press him. Instead, she leaned closer, resting her head on his shoulder. "We are lucky," she murmured. "Even if I don't always understand what goes on in that head of yours." Jack chuckled softly, wrapping an arm around her. "Sometimes I don't either." As the days turned into weeks, the memory of Daniel's family began to fade slightly, like a photograph left in the sun, but the pendant remained, tucked safely away in Jack's toolbox. A silent testament to the strange and beautiful night when a mechanic missed Thanksgiving and ended up learning more about humanity than he ever expected. And though he never saw them again, Jack often wondered if they thought about him too. If somewhere in another world or dimension, they carried a piece of Earth with them, a reminder of the kindness of strangers and the power of simple human connection. Weeks passed and winter settled over the small town, blanketing everything in a thick layer of snow. Life at Jack's garage continued as usual. Cars came and went, customers chatted about holidays and weather, and Jack worked tirelessly under the hood of one vehicle after another. But something had shifted inside him since that strange Thanksgiving night. He found himself slowing down more often, taking moments to appreciate the little things he used to overlook. The sound of laughter from his kids, the warmth of Lisa's hand in his, the satisfaction of solving a tricky repair. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jack closed up the garage early. It wasn't Thanksgiving anymore, but the memory of Daniel's family lingered in his mind like an echo. He wanted to spend the rest of the day with his own family, savoring the simple joys of being together. When he arrived home, Lisa greeted him at the door with a mug of hot cocoa in hand. "I thought you might need this," she said, handing it to him with a smile. "Long day?" "Not too bad," Jack replied, sipping the warm drink. "Just thinking." Lisa tilted her head, studying him curiously. "About what?" Jack hesitated for a moment before answering. "About how lucky we are," he said finally. "To have each other. To be here." Lisa blinked, surprised by his words. "That's random," she teased lightly. "But I'll take it. Come on. The kids are waiting." Inside, the house was alive with energy. Their son, Ethan, was building a tower out of blocks on the living room floor, while their daughter, Mia, flipped through the pages of a picture book. The TV hummed softly in the background, playing a holiday movie neither child seemed to be paying attention to. Jack sank onto the couch, feeling the familiar comfort of home wrap around him like a blanket. As the evening wore on, they played games, shared stories, and laughed until their sides hurt. For a while, Jack forgot all about portals, aliens, and mysterious pendants. But later, when the kids were tucked into bed and the house grew quiet, he found himself staring into the flames of the fireplace, turning the silver pendant over in his hands. The symbols etched into its surface still puzzled him. They weren't letters or numbers, at least not ones he recognized, but they felt meaningful somehow, like whispers from another world. Every time he touched the pendant, he remembered Daniel's earnest gratitude, Rachel's quiet strength, and Emily's hopeful gaze. He wondered if they'd made the right choice stepping through the portal. Had they found peace or regret? Lisa joined him on the couch, curling up beside him. "Still thinking about that night?" she asked softly. Jack nodded. "Yeah. Kind of hard not to." She rested her head on his shoulder, gazing into the fire. "You never told me much about it. Just that you helped some people who needed it. And that they weren't ordinary." "They weren't," Jack confirmed. "But they weren't so different either. They cared about each other, about finding a place where they belonged. Isn't that what everyone wants?" Lisa smiled faintly. "I guess it is." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Finally, Lisa spoke again. "Do you think they're happy? Wherever they are?" Jack thought about it for a long moment. "I hope so," he said. "They deserved a second chance. We all do." Lisa squeezed his hand, her touch grounding him in the present. "You gave them that," she reminded him, "even if you don't realize it." Jack looked down at the pendant one last time before slipping it back into his pocket. Maybe he'd never fully understand what had happened that night, or why fate had led him to Daniel's family. But maybe he didn't need to. What mattered was the lesson he'd taken away, that kindness, no matter how small, could ripple outward in ways you couldn't predict. The next morning, as Jack prepared to open the garage, he noticed something unusual. On the workbench where he'd left the pendant lay a single photograph. Picking it up, he studied it closely. It was a picture of his own family, himself, Lisa, Ethan, and Mia, standing outside their house, smiling brightly at the camera. "On Niu." The back, written in neat handwriting, were 3 words. "Thank you, Jack." He stared at the photo for a long time, his heart swelling with emotion. Whether it was a message from Daniel's family or simply a reminder of what truly mattered, he couldn't say, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the connection, the bond between people, human or otherwise, that transcended boundaries and lasted far beyond goodbyes. From that day forward, Jack kept the photo alongside the pendant, a pair of keepsakes that reminded him of the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. And though his life remained simple and routine, he carried those memories with him always, cherishing the knowledge that even the smallest acts of compassion could change lives, including his own.